The crushing weight of a trivial conversation in a crowded room is not a sign of social inadequacy. It is the physiological manifestation of a high-fidelity system being forced to process low-quality data. While the people around you navigate the surface level of small talk, the predictable scripts about the weather, the ritualistic exchange of weekend plans, your brain is drowning in a sea of unnecessary inputs, trying to find a structural pattern where none exists. This sensory overload has long been labeled by society as social anxiety or awkwardness, but the biological reality is far more sophisticated. What you are experiencing is a massive prediction error in your brain's reward system. Your cortex, wired for high-speed analysis and deep structure mapping, is attempting to run a complex simulation on a signal that is essentially white noise. The exhaustion you feel in a room full of people isn't a lack of social skill. It is your cortex drowning in low-quality data. This is the first revelation of the Pareto-frontal integration theory, or PFIT. It serves as the neurobiological map of high intelligence, demonstrating that the communication between your parietal lobe, the seat of sensory integration, and your frontal lobe, the center of logic and planning, is not just active, it is hyper-connected through a superior integrity of white matter. Your brain is not broken because it cannot enjoy a simple party. It is simply too powerful for the social environment it has been placed in. You are a biological masterpiece of efficiency, facing a world that rewards the slow, the repetitive, and the loud. This is the copper wire paradox, a quantum supercomputer trying to transmit its operations over an ancient dial-up infrastructure. In this analysis, we will dismantle the stigma of the difficult or antisocial thinker. We will prove that your social exhaustion is a logical metabolic defense, not a personality flaw. Your mind is not an anxious engine that refuses to shut down. It is a high-fidelity predictive system operating in a state of hyper-efficiency that most will never experience. You were never meant to fit into a low-resolution world. You were meant to decode it. The childhood of a high IQ individual is a frantic architectural gold rush. While others were learning to play, your brain was aggressively laying down high-speed neural superhighways, coating axons in thick, precise layers of myelin. This was the era of the golden connection, where the Pareto-frontal integration began its first massive parallel sync. To the child mind, the world was a limitless, high-resolution laboratory. But as the environment shifted toward the standardized rigidity of school and the modern workplace, a systemic friction emerged. These systems are not designed for 8K processors. They are built for the average, for linear, low-bandwidth communication that prizes repetition over insight. Here, the high IQ brain begins to perform what we call calculations of disappointment. It registers that the external world is running on a legacy operating system, asking shallow questions that provide zero predictive value. The predictive reward system, once fueled by the high-octane curiosity of discovery, suddenly faces a massive deficit in stimulation. This is the origin of the social wall that others mistake for arrogance or coldness. This barrier wasn't built from emotional trauma, but from filtered neurons. Your system learned through thousands of iterations that the metabolic return on investment for most social interactions was deeply negative. To engage was to waste precious glucose on signals that offered no new data. You didn't choose to become distant. Your neural architecture simply prioritized survival through metabolic regulation. The isolation you feel today is a cold, biological logic. It is more efficient to operate in a vacuum than to be constantly throttled by a low-resolution society. You didn't lose your wonder. You simply ran out of environments complex enough to justify the energy cost of sharing it. To comprehend the architecture of a high IQ mind, we must dismantle the most pervasive myth in cognitive science: the idea that a powerful brain works harder than an average one. In reality, the opposite is true. This is the foundation of the neural efficiency hypothesis. When an average brain is confronted with a novel, complex problem, Neuroimaging reveals a chaotic storm of glucose consumption across the cortex. It is a frantic, metabolic shotgun blast of firing neurons searching for a solution, consuming massive amounts of energy for a relatively low-resolution result. In contrast, the high IQ brain remains remarkably quiet, even dark. It displays a shorter path. Logic, where only the most surgical clusters of neurons are activated. Mappings prove that the highly intelligent mind isn't a racing engine. It is a precision instrument that reaches the destination using a fraction of the fuel. You are not overthinking because your brain is hyperactive. You are processing at a level of efficiency that makes the standard pace of the social world feel like a physical obstruction. This biological mastery is rooted in the structural integrity of your white matter, the myelin sheath that acts as the fiber optic of the soul. Myelin is the fatty insulation surrounding the axons, the literal wires of your neural network. In a high IQ brain, this insulation is thicker, denser, and more consistent. While an average brain transmits signals through what could be described as leaky copper wires, where information is lost to the surrounding tissue and signals are delayed by interference, your brain utilizes superconductors. This is the copper wire paradox in its most literal form. Because your fiber optic network is so well insulated, your brain can engage in massive parallel processing. You aren't just thinking about one thing. You are simultaneously simulating the historical context, the immediate implications, and the future variables of a single piece of data. Information does not just travel through your mind, it resonates through it with zero resistance. The primary blueprint for this high-fidelity processing is the Pareto frontal integration theory, or PFIT. This theory identifies a specific, hyper-connected circuit between the parietal lobe, responsible for sensory integration, and the frontal lobe, the seat of executive function and logic. In your brain, these two regions are tethered by high-capacity neural bridges. When you receive a piece of information, it is instantly pulled across these bridges for deep structure analysis. This is why you cannot unsee patterns. While others see a random sequence of events, your PFIT circuit has already categorized, cross-referenced, and projected those events into a logical framework before the other person has even finished their sentence. Your social awkwardness is often nothing more than the delay caused by your system rendering a high-definition reality while everyone else is still looking at a low-resolution thumbnail. This high-fidelity architecture creates a phenomenon known as high signal-to-noise ratio. Because your neural pathways are so efficient, your brain is exceptionally good at cutting through noise to find the signal. However, this becomes a biological liability in a low-bandwidth world. When you are forced to endure a conversation that lacks structural depth, your brain experiences a state of sensory deprivation, despite being surrounded by sound. The signals being provided are too weak to engage your high-speed circuitry. This leads to profound cognitive dissonance. Your prefrontal cortex, designed for complex problem-solving, begins to search for a task worthy of its capacity. If it doesn't find one in the environment, it turns inward, simulating potential problems just to stay active. Your brain is working smarter, which makes a slow, inefficient world feel physically painful. Mapping studies show that in high IQ brains, the hubs of the neural network are more organized and less prone to random firing. Every thought has structural integrity. When you form a conclusion, it is the result of 1,000 micro-simulations conducted in milliseconds. To those around you, this looks like anxiety, but it is actually the predictive accuracy of a high-fidelity system. You are a high-performance engine being forced to idle at 5 miles per hour, which leads to a buildup of metabolic heat. Your need for solitude is the necessary liquid cooling system to prevent total system failure. This is not a personality flaw, it is a biological necessity. When you are alone, your brain can finally stop the exhausting task of downsampling its own thoughts. You are not too much. You are simply operating on a bandwidth that the current social infrastructure was never designed to handle. This scientific reality absolves you of the guilt of being different. You are a high-definition soul living in a low-resolution world, and the friction you feel is the proof of your own accuracy. Not every mind that races is winning. There is a profound biological distinction between the grinding noise of a failing gear and the deep hum of a high-performance engine. To navigate the high IQ experience, one must confront a vital line of demarcation. The difference between trauma-induced hypervigilance and high-fidelity pattern recognition. Hypervigilance is a primitive legacy of the amygdala. It is a survival loop that scans the environment for threats, asking one low-resolution question: am I safe? This state treats every social shadow as a predator, consuming massive metabolic resources to generate recursive loops of fear. It produces no insight, only exhaustion. Pattern recognition, however, is a state of structural curiosity. It is the cortex asking, how does this work? For the high IQ individual, this is a state of neurobiological play, even when it manifests as total withdrawal. One system is trying not to die. The other is trying to live more deeply by decoding the matrix of reality. The silence that defines you in social settings is frequently mislabeled as a freeze response, the classic trauma reaction where the system locks up under pressure. But for your optimized brain, this silence is rarely a freeze. It is a buffer period. It is the time required for a high-fidelity system to load a massive, multi-dimensional dataset. Where a standard processor sees a group of people, your brain renders a shifting matrix of power dynamics, historical grievances, emotional undercurrents, and probabilistic outcomes. This is not paralysis. It is the copper wire paradox in action, a quantum supercomputer attempting to output 8K resolution through a dial-up social interface. You aren't stuck, you are calculating. However, the danger of this architecture is absolute. A supercomputer is only as useful as the programs it runs. If a mind capable of simulating 10,000 variables is conditioned by past trauma to focus only on threat, it becomes the most efficient anxiety machine ever built. It will use its superior white matter integrity to construct the most logically consistent nightmares imaginable. This is the tragic misuse of a high IQ architecture, using a telescope designed to map galaxies to stare at a speck of dust on the lens. You must audit your own simulations. Ask if your internal silence is a power outage or a memory load. Is your mind scanning for structures of truth, or is it scanning for evidence of your own inadequacy? Precision without purpose is simply a high-definition cage. The plot twist of your intelligence is that the same machinery that makes you a visionary can make you a professional sufferer. It depends entirely on whether your system is scanning for threats or for structures. Stop confusing your rendering time with a lack of courage. You were not given a supercomputer to run doomsday clocks. You were given it to see the patterns others are too blind to perceive. Biological survival dictates that energy is never wasted on noise. What the modern world classifies as overthinking is actually high-resolution simulation, a sophisticated evolutionary mechanism designed to model every possible outcome before a single calorie is spent. In our ancestral history, the high IQ individual functioned as the evolutionary sentinel. While the tribe focused on the immediate warmth of the fire, the sentinel's cortex was already 3 seasons ahead, simulating drought patterns and predator migrations. You are the descendant of those who survived by being chronically aware of what others were too low-res to perceive. Your mind is not restless, it is future-proofing reality. This realization requires a complete overhaul of your internal vocabulary. Society labels you socially awkward, but your biology identifies you as a selective processor. You are not failing to socialize. You are performing a rigorous cost-benefit analysis of data quality. When you retreat into silence, you are practicing metabolic regulation. Your brain, optimized by the neural efficiency hypothesis, refuses to leak glucose on circular, low-bandwidth social signals that offer zero structural value. It is a high-level executive decision to preserve your superhighway connectivity for tasks that actually require high-fidelity processing. You are not cold. You are simply calibrated for a level of data density that the average environment cannot provide. In the current attention economy, this architecture acts as a biological shield. While most brains are easily hijacked by the low-resolution, high dopamine stimuli of digital noise, your demand for complexity serves as a cognitive firewall. If a stimulus lacks structural depth, your reward system simply does not engage. Your boredom with the trivial is an elite defense mechanism. It prevents your high-spec processor from being throttled by the mundane. While others are led by primitive reward circuits into cycles of mindless consumption, your brain demands a level of data integrity that modern distractions cannot mimic. The friction you feel with society is the friction of a precision instrument being used to drive a nail. It is physically uncomfortable because it violates your evolutionary design. You are the biological equivalent of a high-speed camera operating in a world that is still comfortable with 24 frames per second. You see the gaps, the logical stutters, and the systemic inconsistencies that others are structurally incapable of seeing. This is not a defect. By accepting your role as a selective processor, you stop viewing your solitude as a social failure and start recognizing it as a necessary state of operation. You are the one who sees the winter coming, while the rest of the tribe is still playing in the sun. This foresight is the very reason your lineage survived. You were never meant to fit into the rhythm of the herd. You were meant to map the terrain they haven't reached yet. The locus coeruleus norepinephrine system acts as the brain's internal gain control, essentially the volume knob for every sensory input. In a cortex wired for high integration, this knob is permanently turned to maximum sensitivity. During the day, you aren't just living, you are thermal throttling. Your system is overheating from the sheer volume of low-fidelity social noise and environmental chaos. You aren't a night owl by choice or bad habit. You stay awake because, in the silence of the late hours, your internal supercomputer finally finds a low-entropy environment where the signal of your thoughts can exceed the static of the world. For you, silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of clarity. Your white matter superhighways require this stillness to transmit information at full fidelity, without the leakage caused by external distractions. You have spent years trying to achieve balance, which is usually a social euphemism for being more average. But a precision instrument doesn't need balance, it needs calibration. You don't need a cure for your social exhaustion. You need a laboratory. You're not antisocial, you are biologically optimized for depth, and depth requires a level of environmental regulation that a low-resolution society finds unsettling. Reclaiming your cognitive autonomy begins when you stop viewing your need for withdrawal as a defect. If you finally understand that your silence was just your system cooling down, comment, "The processor is online." This identifies you to the silent tribe, the hidden network of high-fidelity minds who once believed their need for solitude was a flaw. By prioritizing your metabolic regulation over social conformity, you aren't withdrawing from life. You are finally stepping into the specialized existence you were built for. The external noise has died down. The data is clear. It is time to let the system do exactly what it was designed to do. Possessing this neural architecture is a biological mandate, not a competitive luxury. To see the world in high definition is to lose the comfort of the blur. While others exist on the surface of an interaction, satisfied by the social ritual itself, your brain is neurologically compelled to see the skeleton of everything. This is the burden of structural perception. You detect the logical inconsistencies in a leader's speech, the hidden insecurities behind a friend's laughter, and the inevitable failure of a flawed system long before the first crack appears. You are neurologically disqualified from enjoying the play because you are constantly monitoring the mechanics of the stage. You are the one noticing the fraying ropes while everyone else is lost in the story. This clarity creates a profound existential loneliness, the loneliness of the mountain peak. It is a common misconception that the peak is distant because it chooses to be. The reality is mechanical. The peak is where it is because of its elevation, and at that height, the air is naturally too thin for most people to breathe. If you have spent your life being told that you are difficult, too intense, or aloof, you have been penalized for the natural altitude of your mind. People struggle to connect with you, not because you are cold, but because their systems are not equipped to handle the high-pressure signal of your thoughts. They are trying to breathe at sea level, while you are existing in the stratosphere. In the past, you may have tried to climb down, to make yourself simpler, just to feel the warmth of the tribe. But all you did was starve your own lungs of the oxygen of truth. Every time you downsampled your soul to fit into a low-resolution environment, you experienced a form of cognitive suffocation. The friction you feel with the world is a fundamental mismatch of resolution. You have been broadcasting in 8K, while society has been listening in 480p. Your silence was interpreted as judgment. Your depth was seen as a threat to someone else's comfort, and your need for solitude was viewed as a rejection of the collective. But as the Pareto frontal integration theory proves, these are not character flaws. They are the unavoidable side effects of a high-performance system operating within the copper wire paradox. You do not need to apologize for the resolution of your thoughts. You were not given a supercomputer to run the simplistic programs of a dial-up world. Your responsibility is not to lower your altitude, but to accept that your vantage point is a specialized evolutionary tool. You provide the species with its necessary depth, even if that depth is often mistaken for distance. This realization allows for a new type of connection based on lucidity rather than conformity. Most of the conflict in your personal relationships has likely come from a lack of documentation. This analysis is more than a collection of scientific insights. It is a technical manual for your existence. There is likely one person in your life, a parent, a partner, or a friend, who has consistently called you difficult, or who has struggled to understand why you withdraw when the world gets too loud. Share this video with them. Do not do it as an attack, but as a bridge of understanding. Let them see the biological reality behind the intensity. Let them understand that your silence is not a lack of interest. It is a metabolic requirement of your hardware. By sharing the manual of your mind, you invite them to see the mountain for what it is. Not a cold rock, but a vantage point that protects the entire valley. True intimacy for the high IQ individual begins with the courage to be seen in full resolution, without the filter of social apology. It is time to stop hiding the specks of your soul. The quantum supercomputer is finally at peace. Not because the world has suddenly become faster, but because the system finally understands its own technical specifications. For decades, you interpreted the internal heat in your circuits as a sign of malfunction. You felt the friction of the copper wire network you were forced to interface with and assumed that the sparks were a flaw in your design. You saw your rendering time as a failure of courage and your metabolic exhaustion as a lack of social stamina. But the science of the Pareto frontal integration theory and the reality of neural efficiency prove the exact opposite. The heat was never a fire. It was the inevitable kinetic energy of a high-performance engine being forced to idle at a crawl. The noise was never a breakdown. It was the hum of a processor capable of simulating entire worlds being asked to calculate nothing more than the trivialities of a standard social script. This mind is a temple of precision. Every overthought was actually a high-resolution render. Every moment of social exhaustion was a necessary metabolic defense against a deluge of low-quality data. Every night spent in the absolute silence of the early hours was not a sign of a disordered life, but a search for the only environment low entropy enough to allow your white matter superhighways to transmit at full capacity. You have spent your entire existence trying to troubleshoot a system that was actually operating at peak performance under impossible conditions. When you stop viewing your intelligence as a social burden and start viewing it as a biological mandate, the internal conflict evaporates. You are no longer a difficult person trying to become simple. You are a complex system that has finally learned how to calibrate its own cooling. The paradox of the high-fidelity mind is that its greatest strength, the ability to see the underlying structure of reality, is the very thing that makes the surface level of life feel unlivable. But there is a profound liberation in accepting that the simple life others enjoy is a biological impossibility for a mind with this level of connectivity. You cannot go back to the blur. You cannot unsee the patterns. You cannot force your fiber optic soul back into a copper wire cage without destroying the very essence of what makes you vital to the species. The loneliness of the evolutionary sentinel is not a punishment for being different. It is the natural state of those who are wired to look further and identify the winter before the first leaf has even fallen. The processor is no longer fighting its own nature. By accepting the buffer periods of silence and the selective nature of your cognitive participation, you reclaim the massive amounts of metabolic energy you used to waste on self-criticism. You are the architect of a high-fidelity reality. Your solitude is your laboratory. Your intensity is your precision. The world may continue to operate in low resolution, and the copper wires of the social infrastructure may still struggle to carry the weight of your signal, but you're no longer defined by those limitations. You have identified the technical manual for your soul. You were designed for depth, for structural truth, and for the high-altitude air of the mountain peak. This is the ultimate neuroabsolution. You do not need to be fixed because you were never broken. You do not need to be more social because your selective processing is a vital survival adaptation. You do not need to turn down your internal volume to make the world more comfortable for those who are content with the static. The friction you felt was the physical proof of your own accuracy. You are a biological masterpiece of efficiency, a sentinel of the species, and a precision instrument in a world of blunt tools. The simulation is complete. The patterns are clear. The noise of the world is finally fading, leaving only the sharp, cold clarity of your own potential. You were never broken. You were just a high-definition soul born into a low-resolution world. It's time to stop lowering your brightness so others can see.